Good morning, or whatever time of day it is where you're located. My name is Alan Regenberg. I'm a faculty member and the Director of Outreach and Research Support for the Johns Hopkins Berman Institute of Bioethics, and I'm a collaborator in the Johns Hopkins eSchool Plus initiative. On behalf of the members of this team, a collaborative effort of the World Bank, UNICEF, and the Johns Hopkins eSchool Plus initiative, I'd like to welcome you all here. The response of global education systems to the pandemic, as well as recovery efforts to get students back on track in more than 200 countries, and specifically to share with you how we, the World Bank, Hopkins, and UNICEF, are tracking the response. GERT, as we affectionately call the Global Education Recovery Tracker, looks at school closures, vaccination of teachers, remedial learning efforts, among other indicators. And to consider what this may mean for equity, learning, and schools serving our most vulnerable students. We will also explore some of the enormous hurdles that K-12 schools across the world continue to face in supporting students in this area in the midst of this unprecedented COVID pandemic. We have with us today the fantastic team working hard on this cross-institutional partnership, and they will walk us through this new tool that launched in the spring of 2021 to understand the educational recovery measures and to identify emerging issues in education resulting from COVID-19 disruptions. Let me get us started by introducing our moderator for this conversation. Kaliope Azzi-Huck is a Senior Operations Officer with the World Bank Education Global Practice based in Washington, D.C. Her work has focused largely on operationalizing social service delivery, particularly education in fragile environments across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Callie currently serves as the education co-focal point on the World Bank Technical Task Force for the coronavirus, tracking country responses and the impact of mitigation measures on learning. Previously, she managed the education portfolio in countries across West Africa, including Sierra Leone during the Ebola outbreak and in Liberia during the regime transition. Her technical work covers performance-based financing, teacher management, data and institutional systems, and impact evaluations. We're thrilled to have her as our moderator today. Welcome, Callie, and over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Alan, for that warm introduction. So as Alan said, my name is Callie Azzi-Huck, Kaliope, and I'm pleased to serve as your moderator today for today's discussion. I think more interesting than my background is that of the three presenters today. So let me start with Dr. Megan Collins, who is a pediatric ophthalmologist and faculty member of Johns Hopkins Wilmer Eye Institute, as well as the Berman Institute of Bioethics. That should give you a sense of how sort of wide-ranging the skills are on this tracker. Dr. Collins' work focuses on health disparities and access to pediatric eye care, the impact of vision on academic outcomes, and the opportunities to advance educational equity. She's widely recognized for her work in school-based healthcare, and those of you working in that field have probably know her, serving on an advisory panel for the National Eye Institute and the Lancet Global Health Commission. So in spring of 2020, Dr. Collins co-founded the Hopkins eSchool Initiative, which is a university-wide collaboration examining the impact of K to 12 school closures on children from disadvantaged backgrounds and providing guidance on reopening strategies for key stakeholders in education and policy, which is how we connected, we in the World Bank connected with Hopkins on this endeavor. So today we've asked Dr. Hopkins to introduce the Global Education Recovery Tracker, which, as Alan explained, is GERT, and its project objectives to contribute and how it's contributing to a discussion about a safe and healthy return to quality schooling for world students, particularly those who have suffered the most and the most disproportionately. So I turn it over to you, Dr. Collins, for a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Callie, for that kind introduction. And thanks to all of our participants today, as well as my colleagues at Hopkins who have worked so hard on this project, as well as our wonderful partners at World Bank and UNICEF. Maria, would you mind please sharing the slides? Thank you. You can go ahead to the next slide, please. So as Callie mentioned, I'm going to walk you through the objectives of the Global Education Recovery Tracker. If you are interested during this presentation, if you like to multitask and want to look at the website at the same time, you can go to covideducationrecovery.global and see some of our interactive tools. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Thank you. So as Callie mentioned, our goal collectively is to contribute to global efforts to ensure a safe and healthy recovery of learning for all of the world's students. Particularly, we know various areas across the United States from some of our work with eSchool Plus domestically, as well as many regions across the world have suffered disproportionately. And children are among the most vulnerable. So thinking about how do we protect them and how do we get them back to school is really our and understand the impacts of their disruption to education over the past now year and a half. What I'm going to discuss over the next few slides is some of our data visualizations and analysis. And the goal is to inform policymakers across the globe, not only to see what's happening in other areas of the world, so we can document the substantial impact this may have had on students, but also to look for best practices and lessons learned so we can collectively move together. And the significance of that is the decisions that I think policymakers at the state and national level are going to be making now in terms of how do we bring students back to school when it's appropriate to school to do so will have implications for child well-being and academic trajectories and thinking about ways to minimize setbacks that may have occurred as a result of the pandemic. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So what do we do in GERT? As you know, as Alan mentioned, we call it GERT. It's the Global Education Recovery Tracker. We look at data and visualizations for 4 key areas: the status of schooling, modalities of learning, whether they're remote, in-person, hybrid, or schools are closed, the availability of remedial education support, both for in-person and virtual learning, and the status of vaccine availability for teachers. And when we look in these areas, we really think about both policy and practice. So in policy issues, are schools closed? Have they reopened? Sometimes have they even reclosed again? Is there prioritization for different students to come back to the classroom? We see this sometimes sending primary school students back earlier than others, or students who may be experiencing more loss by not being in the classroom. We're also, as we're pivoting into sort of the next phase of the pandemic, I think we're looking about issues of recovery and what types of remedial supports are being offered in terms of recovery for students. In terms of practice, we want to understand how remote learning is being offered, how countries are thinking about vaccinations for teachers. We recognize fully that this is not going to be the same across the world based on what the country's availability for vaccines for anybody is. Teachers may or may not be being currently prioritized. And then how are countries thinking about assessments of learning? And again, underlying purpose of all of this is to understand ongoing issues and to identify emerging ones. Go ahead to the next slide, please. In terms of our, if you have gone to our website, what you'll see here is a page that lists all of the countries throughout the world that we've been able to get data from. And in addition to our data approach, which I'm going to describe on the next slide, we also get data from other sources, including our partners at the World Bank and UNICEF, as well as our World in Data, where we get our information about COVID vaccines. But as you can see from this slide here, you can interact with the page and see for any particular country of interest to you, what's happening in terms of school status currently, are teachers being currently vaccinated as a priority group, and what types of in-person and remote supports are happening. And the data that we collect is ongoing. Our visualizations continue to build out as we collect more data and get more information. Go ahead to the next slide, please. In terms of our methodology, we really have a 3-stage approach. For data collection, we collect across all partners using a Qualtrics-based survey. This is a survey that goes out to kind of key personnel from each of our teams every 2 weeks. And it asks a series of questions related to what I just mentioned in terms of policy and practice for education in countries across the world. We ask the respondents to use publicly available information to help explain the status of schooling and the policies being made in that country. When the information comes into us, we then clean and validate all of that data. So we make sure that the data is accurate before it is then disseminated through our website, where we visualize and continually update the information. Go ahead to the next slide, please. And, you know, when we talk about this, in addition to having our tracker, one of the things we are really building out, example is today's webinar, is we're trying to use this data to contribute to the global discussion. And we're also doing that through blog posts. We're hoping to soon be launching some podcasts, as well as continuing with the webinar series that we're starting today. And this is to take all of this information that we have collected, try to help bring it together with some meaningful information that can help those across the world who are interested in this area. And that's what you're going to hear about in the presentations being done by my World Bank and UNICEF colleagues shortly. Go ahead to the last slide, please. Just continuing along with the narrative examples, I think everybody's aware that UNESCO, UNICEF, and World Bank have launched a joint mission Recovering Education 2021, which is focusing on the priorities of bringing children back to school, recovering learning losses, and preparing and supporting teachers. You know, we're very committed to that important mission and using the data generated out of GERT to help as mission recovery education continues. I'm going to turn it now to Tigran, who's going to take us through some of the analyses that we've been doing. Tigran, over to you.
Sorry, thank you, Megan, for that. If I can just jump in before Tigran comes in, so that I may want to introduce him. But I also wanted to let colleagues know that we will have questions at the end. But if you have, please feel free to put your question in the chat so you don't forget, and we make sure to grab it. So now to, I guess, give Tigran's introduction, make sure I'll let you know who he is. He is a colleague who has been part of the bank's core team, along with Maria Barron-Rodriguez, Melissa Adelman, JP Azevedo, and a slew of regional focal points and RTTLs. So the teams are big on all sides. We're honored to have him here. Tigran is our senior education specialist for the World Bank based in Moscow. He is the acting HD program leader and the senior, also based in Moscow, as I mentioned. He's well known to many of you, as he has a number of years, at least 12, with the bank, and works on educational projects in ECHA, LAC, and the South Asia regions. Those projects include the Russian Education Aid for Development, which is READ, the Belarus Education Modernization Project, the Serbia ACD project, as well as the Nagaland project in India. I'm mentioning these so that you have a sense of how his work on COVID-19 also plays into his work on the specific country projects. His research areas include the roles of impact of learning environments on educational achievements. I've seen a number of his work on sort of the impact of COVID for ECHA, along with Harry Petrinos, whom you all know. He's done research on early childhood development, preschool education, and the importance of education quality in educational evaluation, and EdTech and information and communication literacy. So over the last 15 months, as I mentioned, Tigran has been our co-focal point on the education response team. For a background, he also holds a PhD degree from the Russian Academy of Education and Master of Education degree at the University of Manchester. So as you would expect, Tigran knows quite a bit about this. So we've asked him to give the presentation on behalf of the bank team. So let me turn it over to you for our slides, Tigran.
Thank you very much, Kali, for this introduction. This is a great opportunity to share with our broad audience. I look at the number of attendees is growing, so it's great. Just to continue the line of Megan, I would say that the GERT tracker has been up for several months now. We are currently on the 10th round of data collection. So actually we had 9 rounds of data collection as we speak. And all this data provided by staff of our institutions, as Megan mentioned. So it helps us to track a little bit more pronounced picture of what is happening in the world, in the countries related to the school closures, reopenings, and what kind of policies actually countries pursue in recovery in education and trying to bring kids back to school or back to learning, as we speak, as we say. And that was kind of the idea that we discussed during our initial conversation about this tracker, and the discussion were how much data we have and how much do we know about the situation in countries globally, how often do we collect this data, and what do we need to know more and respond better. And that is where GERT actually was born. We actually were inspired by the work of colleagues from Johns Hopkins University on the US, and we decided to go on and try to build this collaboration and expand some of the ideas to the global stage. The GERT, as Megan rightly pointed, is part of the mission recovery in education. It's a global mission, and all global institutions are working on this. And GERT actually adds a little bit of frequency to the data collection that is collected by institutions from country level. As you have noticed, this one is collected by staff of our institutions, not reported by countries, but it adds a little bit more of the frequency, and it's much quicker than those that are prepared by the country teams or country ministries of education that you probably know, collected by UNESCO, UNICEF, World Bank, and OECD now. Next slide, please. So the most interesting picture, as you may guess, and that we initially started to track is the status of education and reopenings in the world. And if you can see here, there are a lot of colors, and the whole map of the world is really diverse. It tells us, so the picture itself can tell us quite a lot about what's happening in the world. And if you look, there are dominating colors are dark blue and orange. Dark blue speaks about in-person training, in-person education, and the orange speaks about mixed education modalities. And what we can say, see now, yes, some of the European countries and ECA countries are now moving towards summer breaks, and this is this bright green color, and basically those that are bright green, most of them were dark blue before they turned to the summer breaks. So what it tells us basically, if we look in Africa, we can see that most of the countries provide education in person, and they are back to school in person. Despite of the probably growing number of COVID cases, it could tell us mostly about the lack of alternatives, basically, in provision of education in these regions. But if we look at other countries and those orange colors, you could see that there are a lot of countries that provide different types of modalities, and this is really at complexity. So for every country, mixed means different things. For example, in some countries, mixed would mean that it's provided in person and remote in some places of the country, and at the same time, some places could be completely closed, and it will all mean it will all mixed. And in some places, it could be in person and hybrid, or hybrid and remote. It will be also colored yellow. Orange. So for more details, you could go to the in the tracker. You could go to the country profiles. You could see exact situation, what is happening in countries. But the picture itself gives us a lot of food for thought, and what's going on in those countries, and what are we seeing here. Next slide, please. But the tracker does not allow only to see the maps. We can also have different levels of statistics, and here we could see the school status by grade level, for example. And you may see that in person dominates, but it slightly goes down as we progress across the different levels of education. So if in pre-primary you could see the more than 60% of education of countries have it in person. Higher education goes down to 50%. And again, if you look at the vocational education, probably the specifics of vocational education, which needs practical exercises, more of the learning in person, they also have a slightly higher level. But how countries compensate? They compensate through hybrid learning and through remote education, and that is the way that we can see the gray bars actually represent the hybrid. And we had some of the thinking behind the hybrid education modality, which probably will become part of our life for some time. In terms of the prioritization for in-person, you could see that there's the dominating 70% of countries, they don't actually prioritize whether to open for some certain groups or grade levels, but the remaining 30%, they distribute differently. So if countries prioritize, they most likely prioritize for grade level, and it's a graduation levels. Then they prioritize with consideration of equity, the students in need, or the same size, or 8% of this prioritization decisions actually lay between the grade level and student need. So it's a combination. So that is the interesting dimensions that we also capture with the tracker, with the GERT data. Next slide, please. And one of the or two more graphs that we collect in the tracker, they actually speak about the in-person educational supports and remote educational supports. And one of these in-person educational supports actually shows us how countries respond, or how countries try to help catch up with education and learning loss. And you could see that in most of the countries, the highest bars represent change in the school year calendar, and in some places it's changes in school day. We have to the other bars, which are pink or magenta bars. We will have to look deeper into this responses. Some countries just click others. Some countries provide the response, what it means. But overall, if we don't look at those, it will be changes in school calendar. And there are already some studies that say that the quantity of learning doesn't mean the quality of learning. Basically, there is a lot of arguments in our recent note for ECHA, for example. We argue for tutoring, and you could see that tutoring is not very widely used by countries. We could clearly see that tutoring could be a good opportunity. So, in positive impact of tutoring, actually 3 months of tutoring actually compensate for 5 months of learning, which is very, very effective tool. If we look at the, go to the next slide, please. If you look at the remote educational supports, you could also see that online platforms dominate, followed by television and, in rare cases, radio. You could see mobile devices. Again, here we can see the bar for remote tutoring, and remote tutoring is the lowest bar. And I would also argue that one of the effective areas for development and policy actions would be remote tutoring. In terms of equity, we don't have a lot of data collected in terms of equity, but that would be probably the area for our future data collection in a tracker. And we could go to the next slide. I will wrap up with the future areas. Exactly the most important, as we can see on this slide, the second map that we introduced on GERT was vaccine availability for teachers. And actually what we ask in this question is whether the teachers are prioritized in the countries for vaccination and whether they are being vaccinated now. So this updated picture was a little bit surprising to me, that we have much more blue areas today than a few months before. A few months before, we had a lot of discussions and actually empty areas for countries. Now we can see that a lot of countries actually prioritize teachers for vaccination and provide it actually. But still, you see a lot of areas where the answer is no, and that is worrisome for many reasons. And we could see that there is a lot of areas for development, specifically in Africa region. So just to sum it up, we have with the tracker actually we could see, and we can see that the picture of the education provision in the world is very, very diverse now. We have different levels of complexity here. We have levels of complexity related to how education is delivered. Is it in person? Is it remote? Is it hybrid? But within remote, we could see that there is another level of complexity that we can observe through the tracker. And all this actually brings us to the situation when we have such a diverse picture that we will have to have a little bit more of the effort in terms of the understanding what works better, what doesn't work as well as we expected. And for the future, I guess we will have another areas of the tracking for example, student vaccination. Now it's getting traction across the world. So just to say here, as we collect a lot of information, probably as we know more, we know less, as they say, and we will have to collect more information and more data to be able to provide good policy advice, and specifically in between the big rounds of data collection that we do within other efforts. So I'll stop here and I'll pass it over to Kali. I'll be happy to answer the questions after the session.
Thank you, Tigran. That was great. Sorry, can you hear me better now? Bit of an echo. Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks again, Tigran. That was great. Finally, let me turn it over to our colleague Jean-Luc Yameogo. Noguebzanga Jean-Luc Yameogo from UNICEF. who is the third partner in this endeavor, along with Hopkins and us. Jean-Luc, as well as Nicholas Rouge, lead the charge from UNICEF in terms of the interactions, the collection, the communication, and everything else. Jean-Luc, for today's purposes, currently serves as an education specialist for UNICEF based at headquarters. He's a member of the Sector Planning, Innovation, Data, and Evidence for Results team, and has 15 years experience in statistics. So we are well covered there. His education sector planning and development, prior to joining UNICEF, he worked for 7 years at IIEP UNESCO, Pôle de Dakar, which some of you are very familiar with, and he was the education policy analyst. And prior to that, he worked at the Ministry of Basic Education, as Jean-Luc hails from Burkina Faso. He also taught educational statistics at the École nationale de la statistique et de l'analyse économique in Dakar, Senegal. Jean-Luc holds a degree in statistical engineering from École nationale d'économie appliquée of Dakar, and a master's degree in education science from the University of Bourgogne, France. He also has collaborated on a number of efforts around our current global data tracking and works with many of the colleagues on this team on many blogs, as well as other surveys that complement the work of the global tracker, which we will get into during the discussion as well. So let me turn it over to Jean-Luc to sort of explain to us what the data that we're collecting means and how it's most useful and what it's likely to tell us. So over to you, Jean-Luc.
Thank you, Shali. I hope you hear me clearly. A year and a half after into this COVID-19 pandemic, we all have now a very clear mission, that is to recover education. And as Tigran already mentioned it, there is this global mission recovery, education recovery initiative that is going. And this can be simply translate. Can we go to the next slide? Translate into three basic points. First is get children back to school, recovery, learning lost, and then support teachers. So this is the three main point of this recovery mission. And in this regard, the COVID education recovery tracker, I mean the GERT, is a critical tool in this collective fight, because it provides the government and the partner with reliable, regular, and timely data that can help to chart the path, both in terms of urgent and short-term action to prioritize when reopening schools and learning recovery, and in longer term, work on building more resilience and risk-informed education plans and budget. The tracker data show that to date, in some, we can go to the next slide. In some countries, yes, in some countries, schools are still closed. There are still some schools that are closed due to the COVID-19 with no distance learning alternative. And it is a preschool level that appears to be the most affected. In countries that have resumed with in-person learning, we also see that the reported coverage rates are still, on average, far from 100%. As you can see, the data show that depending on the education level, between 59 to 70%, I think between 68 to 81% of countries report that the coverage rate is 90% or higher. For the other countries, the coverage rates are still under 90%. Let me go to the next slide, please. So it is important in this process of reopening school that student attendance and return rates are monitored to ensure that no child, especially the most disadvantaged and vulnerable, are left behind. So I don't want to come back on what have already been said, that the school closure is putting at risk many children that have been hard to bring in, to enroll and to provide with education. And as far as schools are closed, the most at risk to not return in school are those children that is the most disadvantaged one. So it is important that the attendance are monitored, and also that the learning outcome are monitored to help mitigate the learning loss. But what we can we learn from the tracker data is not all countries are monitoring the attendance. When you consider in-person learning, it comes at only like 2 out of 3 countries collect data on student attendance for in-person learning. And the number is lower when it comes to remote learning. And similarly, when it comes to quality to learning outcome, we can see that only 1 in 2 countries that have resumed with in-person learning. This includes countries that is practicing full in-person and part-time in-person, I mean the hybrid modalities.
Quel championnat? Ali Campeonato Brasileiro Serie A China Super League G-League Ligue des Champions ou MLS?
So only 1 in 2 countries that have resumed this with in-person learning collect data on learning outcome. For distance learning, the ratio falls to 1 in 3. This is still still low, and we should continue this discussion to have, because it is the only way to guarantee that we are mitigating learning loss, and we are reducing the risk that to see the number of adult school children going up for the next years. Next slide, please. Yes. And another thing that we can raise from this tracker data is the the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted more than ever we need to invest in 21st century learning modalities. This includes digital learning, because a large majority of countries, as you can see this in the first graph, a large majority of countries, from 77% to 90%, depending on the level of education, have adopted internet learning through internet to compensate for the closure of schools. Of course, not all the countries are in the same boat, because internet-based remote learning has been used more by high-income countries more than low and middle-income countries. Can see this percentage increasing as the income level is increasing. And we look at, for instance, for pre-primary education, only 58% of lower middle-income countries reported that they adopted internet for remote as a remote learning modality, while it is 90% for high-income countries. So this kind of information from the tracker is important to remind us of the need to fast-track the work to reduce the inequalities in access to digital learning and make what I'll say what seems to be a kind of grade accessible to all the children wherever they live. From a recent publication of UNICEF, it is revealed that more than 30% of school children, this amount to like 463 million children, are de facto excluded from digital learning. This is what we can see in the second graphic, excluded from digital and broadcast remote learning due to either a lack of policy supporting digital and broadcast remote learning or lack of households assets. And a complementary another study also done by UNICEF has estimated that 1 in 3 children between the age of 3 and to 17 lives in a home where there is no internet. So it appears important that countries invest in this support of with the support, of course, of the partner, and this is one of the acts of I mean, one of the component of education mission recovery. So with the support of all the partner, countries should invest. This is invest in the design and implementation of digital transformation plan that includes component on both infrastructure and ways to use digital technology to accelerate the development and foundational learning, literacy and numeracy skills. And incorporating digital technology to teach foundational skills could complement teachers' effort in the classroom to and better prepare children for future digital instruction. And earlier, still talking about teacher, it is important that teachers are support with digital skills development and distance learning pedagogy training. But this is something that are not really well captured by the tracker, but can maybe this is something on which we can more invest to see what is the kind of support that countries provided to teachers in this sense to help the recovery. We go to the next. I think it is yes, the last. So over to you, Kali.
It looks like Callie might be having some technical difficulties. Callie, are you there?
Okay, it's great timing actually, because I think that was Jean-Luc's last slide and sort of the wrap up. I do want to apologize. We've been asking you to put your questions in the chat, and I understand some, if not all of you, don't have access to that. So a couple of weeks ago, the World Bank updated and upgraded our WebEx platform. So it's taken us, at least on the personnel side, a couple of weeks to catch up. So I think after that, we want to turn into the more interesting, so to speak, part of the presentation and get into the discussion of the so what, why is this important, how is this relevant, why is it different, or how is it different from what other data is being collected. And I guess what's most important to you all listening is how is it different for your work and how is it relevant? I think as was mentioned before, please keep in mind the data is manipulatable. So you can download it in a format that you can analyze yourself for the purposes that you need. So while my colleague Maria, who has been expertly navigating the presentation and coordinating the chat, pulls up some questions, I do want us to get into some of the heart of the discussion. So let me take advantage of having the mic and ask Megan, for example, from Hopkins. How is the data collection that we're doing different from other trackers, and why are we on the inside feel it's relevant for the purposes?
Sure.
Over to you, Megan.
Yeah, thanks, Callie. And thanks to everybody for fabulous presentations so far today. I knew that I worked with an impressive group of individuals, but when I hear your bios from Callie, I'm even more in awe. So, you know, one of the things I think Tigran had shared this at a meeting last week, this is an unprecedented time across the world. And one of the things that I think we've been able to mobilize, because it is 2021, is data collection. And there have been huge efforts being done to understand everything about a coronavirus, and certainly at Johns Hopkins with the Coronavirus Resource Center, we really have, I think, worked hard in trying to lead giving publicly accessible knowledge about cases across the world. In the space that we're in here with GERT, we've really been able to come together across organizations with a shared interest in how do we understand the negative impact that has happened, and how do we think about recovery, and how do we provide the data that will inform documenting who's lost the most and sort of where resources will be needed, and looking at that going forward. So I think one of the unique things, in answer to your question, Callie, about our tracker, is our focus not only on, you know, how has COVID disrupted education over the past, you know, year, but what's it look like going forward? And how are we thinking about the educational modality supports? How are we thinking about teacher vaccinations? How are we thinking about all of these, you know, benchmark assessments, all of those things? Because what's so important, and I think, you know, an area of great interest for us with the Hopkins team is these issues of equity. As you look across the globe, you just see such disparate responses, and you know, there's a lot of things that inform those disparate responses, including lack of access to you know, different resources in different areas of the world. So trying to document and understand that and help us find a pathway forward to help all children is what we want to do.
Thanks so much, Megan. That was great. I think thanks for emphasizing that even though COVID might be on the tail end for some countries, it's still around for a while. The recovery is likely to stay, is the medium as well as long term. To give a flavor to our colleagues, of those who actually are in the trenches and using the data, if I can technically pull this off, I do want to call out to Diego Alonso, who is our colleague working in the LAC region, who is part of our data collection effort, but also data analysis and dissemination. So we get to hear from him, actually uses it for. Sorry, not just Diego. Okay. While we do that, I'm not giving up on that just yet. Let me turn to Tigran. Tigran, we seem to have a unique methodology in telling the data story at a global level as well as at a country level. Can you tell us a bit about the methodology, and why is it important, and how did we set it up the way it is to offer some greater insight?
Yes, Ali. Yeah, basically, to start, for the start, I think nobody experienced anything like this before, and establishing the methodologies was always like, we've been inventing our way, vehicles and the roads for them as we were progressing. One thing that was important for us is the frequency, as I said before. And we could understand right from the on the onset that the frequency wasn't possible, or high frequency wasn't possible with country responses. So if you go to the governments and ask them every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, or even every month, it would be an overkill. So for us, it was very important to have the understanding of how to collect data reliably and as more frequent as possible. And that was that actually led us to the idea of asking our colleagues, and I think we will have some part of gratitude for our colleagues at some point in this conversation. But overall, I think that is our methodology. We agreed and discussed together the questionnaire, the set of questions. It's quite comprehensive. We're not yet showing everything we ask through the questionnaire on the tracker or a global page, but we're progressing towards giving out more data than before. Yeah, so Juan Diego says that he cannot unmute himself, so somebody should unmute Juan Diego. And then we agreed and shared the responsibility in between three of our organizations. It's Johns Hopkins University, UNICEF, and World Bank. And actually, people on the ground are collecting this data. And the methodology is well, in a perfect world, it's two weeks. Every 2 weeks, we collect data about the whole globe. In reality, it doesn't work this way. So different rounds out of those 9 rounds that we already collected have different coverage of the world, but basically you put together this mosaic of information about the countries. And at this stage, we already progressed to the place where we just look at what countries didn't update the information for the long time, and we try to target those. But overall, we have rounds of pushes for the data collection. And I'm sorry for chasing our colleagues with data collection, but this is how it works. So we have a lot of data in between, and given the opportunity that we also work in different teams on the global response, when we collect data from countries together with UNESCO, UNICEF, now with OECD, we know that those efforts take much longer time. So when we ask countries, it takes for 2 to 3 months when these questionnaires are collected from countries. Then we have the processing time, so it's another 1 or 2 months when we prepare the paper. So it takes somewhat 5 to 6 months. And in between that, you don't have actually any information. So GERT actually gives this information, allows us quite reliably understand what's going on in the countries. I'll stop here. Thank you, Kaliope, for the question.
Thanks, Tigran. That was great. So as you can see, our secret is frequency, frequency, frequency. And in return, what we offer our country teams is that we make the survey as nimble as possible, that it shouldn't take long. There's some data that doesn't need to be updated very frequently. So for that, we at least do the favor of skimming over that. We have a couple of great questions. I would love to give Diego the chance to just explain how he uses it briefly, and then I'd like to turn over to Diane, Irum, and then Diane, and I do hope I'm pronouncing your names correctly. So Diego, if we somehow manage to unmute you, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. I am hearing my own echo, so I'm not sure. Let me see. Maybe.
That's fine, Juan Diego. You're clear anyway.
Okay,
so
good.
Good. With that.
Okay, excellent. So thank you very much, Kali. And sorry with these, I couldn't unmute myself on time. I would like to highlight 3 key, I would say, advantages or benefits that I found of the GERT when I first started, just to let people know that I'm part of the COVID-19 task force in the Latin American, the Caribbean region at the bank, education division, of course. The first one was that we were able to, from the get-go, to quantify and qualify both the degree or the magnitude of the problem that we were facing. And how did we use this? We are currently, ever since the pandemic started, we started publishing a monthly monitoring dashboard in our unit, where we published the, it's a kind of a two-pager, very short one, where we try to document or provide an update on the impact that the pandemic is having. And usually the shortest possible impact is the one on school closures, meaning shortest in a period of a month, because we can show whether we are progressing or not progressing in this regard. So the GERT maps were kind of one of our core inputs into each and every single monthly dashboard. Most importantly, also, we published a flagship report in March. It's called the Acting Now report. It's been kind of widely disseminated because at one point the LAC region was the epicenter of the pandemic. So it was disproportionately affecting our region. So we thought we need to increase the volume of our voice to really put this together in a way that could be forceful to understand the magnitude of the crisis. So we use a lot the info from the GERT. Also, we could link the GERT info with other tools developed by the bank, one of which already was mentioned by you, Cali, the simulation of learning losses tool developed by JP Acevedo. Also for validation purposes, we could, double check when we estimated learning losses, whether schools were really closed or whether it was a partial part of the system that was opened. And finally, also to prepare and design response work programs. For instance, in Argentina, we are now on the basis of info collected, over months in the GERT, we are preparing, some recovery strategies as the system is very, very low and slightly start to reopen. And as far as the challenges go, of course, the periodic update was one of the challenges, but as you correctly put it, Cali, the fact that now we have this new pre-filled out format and the fact that it's very nimble helped a lot. But there are, still a few challenges that, for instance, there's one question about whether teachers are being vaccinated as a priority group. And there are countries that started vaccinating teachers, but not as a priority group. So teachers are being vaccinated, but not as a priority group. So it was at one point we faced this issue. Okay, it's not a priority group, but they are being vaccinated because of the age range and all these things. But these are challenges that usually emerge. But overall, it's a terrific tool that I am, very pleased to be also nudging my colleagues in my unit to fill out periodically. I hope this helps, Cali. Over to you.
No, that's great, Diego. I think that thanks for that practical picture. Let me now turn it over to Uram. Again, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name, who had an excellent question. So Patrick, if you can unmute our colleague. And please introduce yourself so we have a sense of your of where you're from.
Sure, and it's my name is Iram, and I am actually an early childhood teacher in Washington, D.C. And my dad is Junaid Ahmed, so he works at the World Bank, and he had forwarded this WebEx to me. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to just learn about all the work that is happening from a global perspective. And definitely a lot of the data that was shared is something that I can relate to as a teacher in DC as well. So my question for the panelist is that as you collect all this data and you think about recovery efforts and are creating different policies, is there a plan in place to collaborate with teachers who are the ones on the ground teaching and adjusting to, a craft that we have learned as in-person teachers and having to adjust and do hybrid teaching or remote teaching? So as we move forward, are there plans to collaborate with teachers who can provide suggestions based off of their experiences in this past year? And thank you.
Thank you, Iram, and congrats on opting for early childhood teacher. I'm sure Papa Junaid, although I don't know you, would have wanted you to be an economist. Let me turn it over. As you know, Hopkins being an academic institution, the World Bank working at policy, I think UNICEF is probably best placed to answer this question, as they do the most on the ground working with practitioners. So Jean-Luc, could you please answer Iman's question?
I think the quick question is know whether there is a plan to collaborate with teachers on the field as we are responding to the COVID-19. Did I get the question? Okay. I think it is the most important thing I shall say, the beginning is in every response that we at least for UNICEF, and I guess it is the same for World Bank, when we are supporting countries in their effort to respond to COVID-19 or to any other crisis, is to help government first to set up their own plan, and we support the government within the national plan. So obviously, I'll say at the level of the grant, even within the national education groups, or there may be a framework of discussion to make sure that every responses that are being supported in the national level are fully shared with national counterparts, including teachers. But at a global level, I don't want I'm not aware of a global initiative bringing teachers together for a response plan to the COVID-19. So I'm not sure. Maybe it exists, but I'm not sure at a global level if we have this kind of framework.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. I think that's great. I think you're right. At global level, we do run into a lot of issues in terms of interacting with teachers, though we're trying. I can tell you sort of a couple of examples of the countries that I work on. We have been working to help ministries sort of validate as opposed to create modules so they can support teachers. And through that, we do get a lot of feedback about what's working or what's not. And as you as a teacher know, we're sort of navigating and sort of building this airplane as we move forward, still even a year on, but it has gotten much better. So there are examples where we are working with teachers mostly to provide additional services, additional trainings to help them, because we see an opportunity, at least for our low-income countries, where this remote learning at different ages can be a way to bring in kids who are known to be out of school or drop out, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope that has answered your question. Let me turn over to Diane, who had also a great question. So over to you, Diane.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So thank you very much for taking my question. I'm Diane Richler, and I co-chair the GLAD Network's Inclusive Education Working Group with Hannah Alusateri of the World Bank. And so I'm particularly interested in knowing what the tracker can tell us about who's not returning to school. A few particular concerns. I mean, the data that you showed us already showed the link between poverty and or low income and being out of school. And certainly there's a close relationship between poverty and disability. But I'm wondering more specifically about whether there's a consistency in the approach to remediation with the recommendations of the GEM report on inclusion. You know, it seems to me that there are two potentially conflicting priorities. One is getting as many children back to school as possible, and the other is thinking about quality and equity. And I'm just wondering where the equity piece fits in here, and whether approaches to pedagogy such as universal design for learning are being considered to ensure that all learners can take advantage of the return to school. And, you know, particularly, for example, a lot of the information that we're receiving about application of ITC shows how learners with disabilities cannot take the same advantage of that as other students. So any information you can share on those issues would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Diane. Megan, do you want to take this one or call on someone from your team to take it, or?
I was going to start, and then I was going to ask Annette Anderson if she is willing, because she is our School of Education expert here. But so Diane, great question, and I think your question as well as Aram's previously highlight the need for us to be collecting this data and sharing it the way that we are, because I think people need to use it for many different purposes, and really, you know, having the ongoing data that's being collected the way that we're collecting it is really important for people to be able to track what's going on. Diane, in answer to your question, we actually ask specific questions in the survey about different populations to see whether or not they're being prioritized for in-person return to school before other students. And that includes children who are economically disadvantaged, children with special learning needs, children academically at risk. So I think what we do is we visualize all of that information with the goal that countries and ministries of education within countries can then use that information to make their decisions about what are the best practices based on what their resources and needs are. But it looks like Annette Anderson, you are on camera, so I would love if you could weigh in too as well, and maybe just briefly introduce yourself to the group. So Annette is one of our co-founders of the eSchool Plus initiative from the Hopkins side, but Annette, please.
Sure. So Diane, I thank you for an excellent question. I think that your question really speaks to how challenging data collection has just been over the course of the pandemic writ large. And, you know, even as we look at what it means for a school to be closed, you know, there are different definitions of what a closed school is. And so I think that what we're trying to now do is trying to line up all of what those definitions mean and lay them out so that we can have side-by-side understandings of what it means for a school to be open or closed. As you raised the questions about things like, you know, the remediation pieces and, you know, UDL, all of those things are really going to be important as we go back to school in the fall. But one of the key pieces, and Jean-Luc talked a little bit about this in his presentation, one of the key pieces that we really need to track more closely is this attendance piece, chronic absenteeism, looking at this level of disengagement. In order for us to really build a more robust picture of what we need to remediate, we need to understand not only who showed up, but who didn't show up. And I think that, you know, part of the challenge that we have, again, is looking at how we're going to collect that data at a global level with some consistency. But these are things that we are looking at. Definitely in our eSchool Plus domestic tracker, we have already started looking at some of this. And so at a global level, we know that this is something important for us to track as well. Thank you.
Thank you both. I see Jaime has joined us, so I want to give him a chance, unless we had, I want to give him a chance to please give us our closing remarks and sort of what on the tracker and what this means. I'm conscious that we're now already at 10:10. So Jaime, may I turn it over to you? Welcome. Sorry, let me just, for the very few who may not know you, Jaime Saavedra is our Senior Global Director for Education in the World Bank. So that means that puts him in charge of all of our education programs, both analytical and operational. And he is leading the charge on sort of raising the alarm on education, the need for it, the crisis we were already engaged in. So let me turn it over to you, Jaime, please, to tell us your
Okay, no, now you should be able to hear me. So thank you very much, Callie. Thanks for saying that I'm leading the charge. But actually the charge I mean, counts on a lot of people like you and all the teams, many of which are connected, who are on the ground, I mean, actually working with our country teams. And I want to start by thanking, I mean, our colleagues in UNICEF, Nicolas Rouge, Jean-Luc, Yameogo, Megan Collins from JHU, and all her team. For this fantastic partnership of the three institutions, bringing the comparative advantages and expertise of professionals from these three big organizations, and that can allow us then to provide more and better information to both to our teams, but to the overall international community. I just want to emphasize the importance of this tracker as a tool to gather data and monitor what's going on in terms of responses of all countries. We unfortunately, I mean, some months ago, we were saying, well, maybe data might not be needed anymore because yeah, we might be entering a phase of recovery, so remote learning will be less important. So actually, we were wrong on all those accounts. Unfortunately, we established this tracker because this challenge that we have of the pandemic is something that's still continuing. Countries have to still implement policies both to handle the crisis, but also, and then try to recover from the crisis. But it's a protracted crisis. We're here for the long haul, unfortunately, in terms of making sure that we know well what's going on in terms of handling the crisis and coming out of it. So data regarding what's going on with teachers, what's going on with remote learning, not only as some people were saying, not only about the supply of remote learning, but what's the take-up, but what's the impact and effectiveness of remote learning is each time more important. What's happening with teachers, what's happening with sanitary conditions. This is a crisis that is still accompanying us, and having information like this is each time more important. We also see this as part of a broader effort that we are undertaking with UNICEF and UNESCO, that we call it Mission Recovering Education 2021, which have the priorities of bringing children back to school, recovering learning, preparing and supporting teachers. And we see this as the putting down the fire during this 2021. I mean, really thinking of an emergency that our countries have to tackle in order to recover, to try to come back to school and to recover learning. But to do that, I mean, having the right data at the right moment that can allow us to see what's happening in each countries and compare across countries is absolutely essential. My sense is that we're not there yet, right? I know I'm talking about the tracker itself, but in terms of the data that is being generated at the country level, we are not there yet in terms of the data on learning losses, for instance. So much more investments will continue to be needed. But having a framework like this one that will allow us to monitor and see what is the data out there at the country, the regional, and the global level is absolutely essential. So just want to congratulate all the teams of the three institutions for all this work, and want just to make sure that we all continue in this effort in the coming weeks and months. So thanks to everyone, thanks to our country colleagues for their support, and let's keep on going. Thank you very much, Kali, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Jaime, for giving us those excellent closing remarks. I do want to take a moment to thank our panelists, our presenters today. I hope we gave you all some good information and didn't completely bog you down with the numbers. And I hope that the message from Jaime about how we're in a protracted crisis within an already existing crisis that needs a lot of attention. And lastly, thank you to you, Jaime, for the support you've given our team to be able to engage and continue with this. We do realize the bank has a lot of demands coming at it in terms of the support. So at this point, unless there's anything else, I think we shall release people, and thanks everyone for attended. At one point, we had just under a little below 100 attendees. So there's definitely, we appreciate the interest and we hope to keep this going. Thanks again and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone.